Carson Creek is one of those towns that doesn't show up on tourist posters. Rusty water tank with faded inscription "Welcome to Carson Creek" rises above the coniferous sea of firs. The damp spring air smells of tar, wet asphalt, and the distant ocean. Route 202 runs past a rickety gas station, and in the morning you can always hear the crackle of an old radio. Anyone who moves here for the first time passes the main street in 3 minutes, and then notices. The city continues to live, even if no one is looking at it. The Harper House was built back in the 1920s with the money of a timber merchant who never got married. Now the cracked clapboard was supported by fresh nails, hammered in by David Harper himself. Drafts came through the leaky frames, and every spring Allison made a list of small things to repair. The list grew, and the patchwork quilt of their life meanwhile covered the gaps that only the owners knew about. The clock was ticking in the white-boarded kitchen. General Electric Model 1958. Allison loved them for the soft, almost musical movement of the hands, but today the sound was annoying. It reminded how many moments she devoted to other people's worries, forgetting about her own. She beat the eggs and added spinach and goat cheese. Jessica hated greasy bacon. The flame from the burner flickered on the wedding ring. A tiny scratch, a reminder of when she and David hung little Jess's swing 10 years ago. Then there was enough future for everyone. "Mom, it smells great," the daughter shouted from above, and a pair of sneakers clattered down the steps. Signed up as a volunteer for the Iris Festival. The city fathers decided that young faces were needed. "Young people will save this city if the elders stop skimping on culture," Allison grinned. Jessica laughed briefly, taking up the toast. Her mahogany hair was pulled back into a bun. A small camera earring flashed in her earlobe. "Dad, can you give me a Mustang on Saturday?" she asked her father when he folded the newspaper. "I want to shoot an episode on the highway to Astoria, a retro car against the backdrop of the Pacific Ocean." "If you promise not to drive," David replied, adjusting his glasses, "and don't forget the insurance." His voice sounded casual, but Allison sensed a cautious pride in it. She was about to offer help to her daughter, but her thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of a landline telephone, the only connection with the outside world for her neighbor, Mrs. Collins. "Ellie, honey, could you come over?" A weak, senile voice rustled in the receiver. It looks like the plugs were knocked out again, and the cat locked himself in the closet. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Allison promised. She covered her hand with the microphone. "David, will you come by after work?" "I'll try," he muttered, burying himself in the newspaper again. The word "I'll try" sounded in their house as often as ambulance sirens along the highway, and it didn't mean anything good. Jessica caught her mother's gaze. "I'll go see Mrs. Collins after class." When the family moved away, the house became too big. Allison went down to the basement to get paints, but found only dried tubes. She brushed off the dust and decided to walk to the center. The journey took 15 minutes, past a gas station with the best filter coffee 40 miles, and a car repair shop rust and chrome, where mechanics in bandanas argued about baseball. Bookstore second chapter, it smelled like cinnamon. Owner Stanley brewed mulled wine to lure customers. "Allison, fresh watercolor albums are on the third shelf," he shouted. But her eye was drawn to the sale cardboard box. In the marble notebook, each letter began, E, postmark, Carson Creek, June 1977. "The trees here are higher than the houses, and the people are lower than their desires." They wrote there. Allison's heart twitched. The lines sounded too close. "An interesting find," said a man in a leather jacket and baseball cap. "Portland Mavericks, about 35 years old, a thin scar on the cheekbone. Nat Rivers, just from Portland. In the evening, I read my stories at Blossom Cafe. Come on, the town needs new stories." He held out a business card. The paper was warm, like someone's hand. The notebook cost Allison $1 and a long trail of thoughts. The Oregon lumber warehouse smelled of fresh lumber and diesel fuel. David was recording the readings of the moisture indicators when the foreman whispered, "The cotter pin has been removed from the center beam. If you see it, keep quiet. Your deadlines are running out." David looked at the rusty wound under the fresh paint and heard the boss's voice in his head, cutting the inspection department. The noise of the boards made him flinch. The sound itself seemed like a reminder that a family and a mortgage could collapse just as suddenly. By 6 in the evening, the rain turned into a spring downpour. The sidewalk reflected the neon signs of Lucky Lotto. In the Harper house, the lamps burned amber. "I made lasagna," Allison said, sprinkling on the oregano sauce. Jessica wearily dropped her backpack. "Professor Lambert selected my series, Silent Asphalt, for a regional competition. First place internship in the Oregonian." "I'm proud of you," David said, but his gaze went to the window. "You're tired," Allison said softly. "Long day," he snapped. The silence stretched like a wet string. Jessica took a deep breath. "I'm applying to the University of Portland, the best photojournalism program." "Portland is expensive and unsafe," David replied. "Is it safe here? To suffocate?" she burst out. "Sorry." Allison covered her daughter's hand with her hand. "Let's discuss this over the weekend," she suggested. "Calm down, together." At 8:30, David locked himself in his office. The clatter of keys could be heard through the thin walls. Allison remained at the kitchen window, where the raindrops painted watercolors. She opened the notebook. If you feel that the windows of the house look inward and not outward, run. The world is noisy, warms and hurts, but silence is worse." She listened. Papers were rustling in the office, boards were groaning in the attic, the wind was blowing up. These sounds contained a whole orchestra of her everyday life, and each instrument reminded how for many years she conducted family life herself, forgetting to pause for herself. "How many times have I put off my dreams?" Allison thought and remembered the album where she kept sketches. A bright red hummingbird over a turquoise wave, a night highway leading into the desert. She never transferred any of this to canvas. Thunderstruck, the light blinked and went out. For a moment the house was plunged into Inkai darkness, smelling of damp wood and something else change, perhaps. The machine clicked and the light returned. Allison stood up. "There was a heavy feeling in my heart, but for the first time in a long time, not emptiness, but concentration." She took out the keys to the shed where the easel was gathering dust. "The brushes may be dry, but they can be washed." On the eve of a thunderstorm, it is always good to start new stories. The night after the rain turned out to be shorter than Allison wanted. By morning, transparent circles had dried on the curtains, as if the rain was trying to leave a message, but the words had spread. At 8 in the morning, when David was already leaving for another on-site inspection, and Jessica was rummaging through the mailbox for a letter from the university committee, Allison was left alone in the kitchen, and I could no longer ignore how the past stuck to my fingers. Opening the marble notebook, she came across a new line. "Any door, once opened, continues to tremble even when closed." The phrase threw her back so sharply that the mug slipped off the shelf. The china shattered, and the sound, the same thud that had begun her own secrets, echoed through the house. 1. Spring 2 years ago. April was much the same, damp, smelling of pine and sea salt, only inside Allison, it was the dry season. David was working late, the district budget was bursting at the seams, and Jessica was living with headphones in, preparing for graduation. The house absorbed all the colors. That day, she took the risk of going to the coast, catching the sunset over the ocean. The sky was glowing tangerine, and she suddenly needed a new tube of cadmium. Shop Pacific Art Supplies in Astoria, he worked until 7. At the entrance, the door was propped up by a bag of canvases. Several brushes rolled onto the sidewalk. "Careful," a male voice called out. "If one more brush dies, I will have to take a vicious oath against the arts." He looked up, a narrow face, long black eyelashes, a beanie, from under which hair the color of dark chocolate was escaping. The badge read Ryan Consultant, but she later finds out that the name is a pseudonym. "Are you an artist?" he asked, as if artist meant the whole world. "Sometimes when the stove doesn't need to be repaired," she smiled. He offered compensation for the mess paper cups of coffee from the machine. The first conversation was deserted highways, misty colors of the north. a song Fleetwood Mac in dynamics. The sound of rain on the roof made the moment intimate, cut out of time. 3 days later, she needed cadmium again. Ryan was waiting in a dark green Subaru. It smelled like cedar freshener and cinnamon. Over lunch on the pier, they argued why the brightest colors were born in cloudy weather. He listened as if every word had a taste, and this hungry interest fueled the flame within her. Then an abandoned lighthouse, the wind beat against the stones so fiercely that you wanted to scream. He ran his fingers over her palm with a light, almost weightless gesture, as if he was checking whether she was alive. The heart answered dully and loudly, like the beat of a drum. The room smelled of bleach and cheap jasmine, but when he kissed her, all the smells disappeared. Ryan kissed slowly, as if studying the texture of her skin. Palms unraveled invisible knots of constraint. They laughed in the sheets, whispering agreements about stupid things, what soundtrack suited their story, what color the pre-dawn sky was. Sex with him was not just a flash, it broke the locks of the cells inside her. In the car, under the whisper of the rain, in the back seat, where the drops beat out a rhythm. In the room where the window overlooked the parking lot, on the cold sand under the lighthouse each time she came to life, like a canvas on which a brush was first passed. And every time she returned along Highway 202, Allison heard the dull echo of conscience behind her. But she answered the messages again. "I'm leaving to pick up some soil. I'll be there in the evening." He didn't ask about her family. That silence was a gift, a separate reality without David and Jess. She called him Northwest Mirage. He called her June Woman. When she mentioned her daughter's passion for photography, Ryan offered to borrow a lens and the word daughter cut out, as if the film had crackled and showed two incompatible frames for a minute. Late-night notification from Jessica family selfie on the beach. "Mom, where are you?" Lit up the motel darkness screen. Ryan slept with his arm around her, and Allison saw herself from the outside, a woman between the life of 20 years and the flash of several weeks. Last meeting at the lighthouse. The wind howled as if it wanted to tear out their words. She came without a coat. Ryan threw the jacket over her shoulders. "I love you," he said so simply, as if to your left. "There, behind this jacket, is my family. And I still love them," she replied. He looked for a crack, didn't find it, nodded. "When you want to remember that you are alive, the lighthouse will stand." A bitter, salty kiss, the jacket was returned to the owner, and Allison steps on the wet stones without looking back. The first weeks without him, the laundry basket fell like a heavy oppression. The toaster threw out undercooked bread. The brushes seemed like meaningless sticks. But one day in the mirror she saw a different look. The glow of fire settled in him. A month later, a postcard arrived. A photo of the lighthouse and a replica, even closed doors vibrate. No signature, no address. She hid the card in her sketchbook. David, noticing that his wife was drawing again, said, "It's like you've returned from a long winter." The words warmed and slightly burned. He didn't know what kind of winter she was getting out of. Picking up the pieces of the mug, Allison thought. The secret belongs to her alone and lives between the pages of the notebook. At noon, she opened the shed, took out an easel, and printed out the canvases she had bought shortly after the breakup. Cadmium, ultramarine together, they gave violet, the color of the wind at the lighthouse. The hand trembled, but it was not shame that led the hand, but the memory that the world is great if you dare to believe in yourself. The brakes squeaked. David returned earlier. He stood for a minute, watching his wife draw, and a cautious respect flashed in his eyes. "What is the name of the picture?" he asked. Allison wiped her hand on an old shirt. "I don't know yet, but it seems it will be about a door that still shakes even though it is closed." He touched her shoulder, an awkward but sincere gesture. Allison smiled. The past had not disappeared, but it had become a paint, not a crack. "The mystery will wait. First, you need to finish the first layer and give Jessica the lens." Life went on with showers, beacons, and closed doors that still retained the sound of footsteps. Saturday morning began with the smell of cinnamon and the honking of a woodpecker, which had taken a liking to the old maple tree in Harper's yard. David, still in his pajamas and with an untamed curl at the back of his head, was trying to build an impromptu drawing on the kitchen table. The inspection of a new warehouse required calculations of load-bearing beams, and the house stubbornly attracted all his rulers to the magnet from under the refrigerator. Allison, wrapped in a knee-length plaid shirt, stood at the sink, watching the wet brush mark dry on her palette. For the first time in a long time, she painted almost without stopping. The painting, the trembling door, grew in layers of purple and tangerine strokes, and every day the house became more crowded for her canvases. This morning she was waiting for an audio message from the librarian Mary. A window was to be vacated in the city reading room for a personal exhibition. A booming excitement trembled in my chest, but voices in the house kept drowning it out. "Is your woodpecker not getting enough bark again?" David muttered when the bird noise became annoying. "He's not mine. He's just used to the fact that no one shoots here." Allison began, but didn't finish. A bare foot stomped down the stairs. Jessica appeared like a stream of light reflected from the ocean. Denim overalls, t-shirt with the exhibition logo Pacific Light, freckles that have become brighter after a recent trip to the Cape. She was holding a mug of coffee in her hands, and something was burning in her eyes that her mother immediately read a mixture of fear and delight. "Good day," said the daughter, but "good word" came out half a tone higher than usual. Allison, as always, was the first to notice the details. Gold flashed on her ring finger. A chill ran down her spine, as if someone had opened a window to a draft. The ring was thin, a simple bezel, but a tiny sapphire caught the light. The color of the sea under the sunset sky of Astoria. "David," she quietly called out to her husband. He raised his head from behind the ruler, followed her gaze, and dropped the pencil. A miniature pencil log rolled straight towards the toe of his slipper. "Jess?" he asked. The daughter seemed to be rehearsing this scene. She exhaled, put the mug down, and, smiling broadly, raised her hand, as if demonstrating a new lens that she always forgot to cover. "Dad, Mom, Ryan proposed to me." The words hung in the air, clinking like glasses in a restaurant where the holidays were accidentally mixed up. David blinked and sat up straight, like an inspector suddenly called to the stand. Allison froze. The world narrowed to one name, which, like an iron beam, fell on her inner floor. "Ryan?" she asked too quietly. Jessica took this as surprise, but not as alarm. "Ryan Hale," she clarified, and Allison caught her breath. A different last name, and yet isn't it the same face that flashes in her memory? We have known each other for almost a year, since that workshop in Portland. She began to tell the story quickly, jumping from fact to fact like a pebble on water. How Ryan helped on the set, how he untangled the flashes, bought her hot tea when her settings were lost, how together they caught the fog on the bridge St. John's even before dawn, how he supported her when submitting her portfolio to the competition Emerging Northwest Voices. The voices of birds, the sound of a drop on the windowsill, the rhythmic creak of a clock mechanism, everything receded before the storm of words. David, collecting himself in pieces, found a fatherly tone in himself. "Daughter, we don't even know this young man. You're both young. Maybe you should wait." "We thought a lot," she interrupted. "We don't want to rush the wedding, Dad." A sentence is a symbol. He says he believes in us ahead of time, and I do too. Allison listened as if the sound was coming through a muffled cable. The name Ryan entered the room over and over again, each time imprinting itself in the mind with a red stamp. She remembered the scar on her cheekbone, the smell of cedar in the cabin Subaru, the crunch of sand under the soles of the lighthouse. 2 years ago, the same spring whistled on the neighboring trees. A silent question flashed in my head. What if this is the one? Too many coincidences. Name, Portland, love of foggy sunrises. But could her Ryan be the same age as Jessica? Then he was about 35. No, now 37. Jessica is 20. The difference is scary, but romance magazines are full of similar stories. She forced herself to breathe evenly. "I invited him to visit us," the daughter continued. "Tomorrow, if you don't mind. He wants to get to know each other and listen to questions." David pinched the bridge of his nose. On any other day, he would have exclaimed that he needed to check the guy's background, ask him what he did. Now he could do nothing better than pick up the spinning pencil and drop it again, as if it were its own pendulum, showing that their world had swung. Ryan works as a documentary cameraman in the studio Evergreen Films, Jessica explained. Now on vacation, the project is finished. I understand that everything is fast, but he is serious, and he gave me a camera with a manual lens from the 1950s. Allison felt a lump rise in her throat. The camera is a symbol of trust, and the ring is a seal. It's all too similar to the past life she hid. She looked at her right hand, where a thin white strip of skin still remembered the wedding mark of the motel light, but on her left her rightful ring shone. Jessica paused, waiting for a reaction. Excitedly, she fiddled with a chain with a tiny cactus pendant, a gift from Ryan for endurance in the desert of other people's expectations, as he said then, during their first joint expedition to Columbia Gorge. First of all, congratulations, Allison breathed, hearing her own voice tremble, but trying to give it warmth. Surprise. Big. And we are very glad that you are happy. David nodded. Worker automatism gave him the phrase. Of course. The main thing is that you understand and support each other. Jessica rushed to hug both of them at once and loudly kissed her father on the cheek. Tears glistened on her eyelashes, not from melancholy, but from an excess of feelings. Thank you. I know this is unexpected. Will tomorrow at 5 be fine? I'll make my signature blackberry pie, and you can ask him any questions you have. At 5, David confirmed, glancing at his wife. At 5, Allison echoed. Noon. When Jessica, frantically typing messages to her friend, slammed the front door and rushed off on her bicycle to the flower farm to buy lavender, silence fell in the house. David folded his hands on the table as if about to interrogate a suspect. You. Look pale, Al. She sat down because her legs were shaking. The wind lazily shook the torn pencil on the windowsill, and the tapping of the lead on the glass seemed like the second's hands. Do you remember the name of my consultant in Astoria? She asked after a pause. Consultant. He tried to guess. The one you bought paint from a couple of years ago? I think Ryan. You joked about his eternal companion coffee. Yes, I remember. Why? She shook her head. Just interesting. It's a small world. Probably different. The phrase sounded unconvincing. David furrowed his eyebrows, but seemed to decide that his wife was worried about her daughter, and everything else was speculation. Listen, he said more softly than usual. I'm worried too. But let's get to know the guy before jumping to conclusions. Allison nodded, doing her best to feign agreement. But inside, as if someone had turned on a film projector, frames flashed one after another. Dark green Subaru, sapphire headlights on a wet highway, a tiny scar on his cheekbone. If this is Ryan, how will she explain? And if it's not the right one, why does the name hurt so much? Evening. Allison tried to paint, but the brush wouldn't obey. The purple went wrong, the tangerine turned into a dirty osher. She put down her palette, washed her hands, and took out her phone. All she has left from that novel is a postcard with the words, "Even closed doors vibrate," and a single old contact, R, from whom there was no communication for 2 years. The number was local, +1 971. The phone lay in the palm of my hand like a fortune-telling stone. Call, check, or let the past die completely. She hid the device as if it were forbidden fruit and moved into the house. David was drawing a chart in the living room, but when he noticed his wife, he closed his laptop. Shall I pour you something? He suggested. Herbal tea. The mugs touched the wooden tabletop in a cracked duo. Basketball was playing in a low voice on the TV, but the sound was muted. In the large photograph above the fireplace, the three of them at Edge Creek Falls, smiles still without a shadow of current worries. You know, David began, I suddenly remembered how I proposed to you. We then dropped the ring into the sand, and you said that it was a sign. If we find it, it means fate. Allison smiled slightly. And you found it. Yes, and I've been holding it for 23 years. Maybe Jess and Ryan will find theirs too. She nodded as if in agreement, but inside the night was darkening faster. She had no right to hang her secret on her daughter's happiness, but how to protect the family if the past could knock on the door in human form tomorrow at 5? The lamp on the table flickered as if winking. Allison went to the window. Outside, a maple tree sparkled with its wet bark, and a familiar woodpecker was hammering away at the trunk, beating out a nervous rhythm. With every beat, the heart echoed, "Ryan, Ryan." She said out loud, in a whisper, so that her husband would not hear. Let it be just a coincidence. But even in the whisper, there was a note of doubt. Night. The house was silent, but Allison was not sleeping. Behind the closed door of the studio, she laid out letters from a marble notebook, remembering the advice of an unknown author. If you feel that the windows of the house are looking inward, look out first. She turned off the lamp, turned it on again, convinced herself that tomorrow was just an acquaintance, and that the world was great, but not so evil as to pit her against ghosts. The clock showed 2:17 when she finally lay down. David hugged her sleepily. His hand was warm, reliable, as always, and yet it did not calm. A new fear was beating inside her, the fear that the trembling door might swing open at the very first question of her daughter. "Mom, how do you know my choice so well?" This question has not yet been asked. While it was night, the sound of a woodpecker, the sapphire on Jessica's ring, and exactly 27 hours until the 5th Sunday evening. Allison squeezed her husband's hand and whispered into the darkness, "We can handle it." She wanted to believe that the answer would not force her to look for a new door in order to close it again, trembling. Carson Creek awoke to Café au Late Skies. It was barely past noon on Saturday, and the Harper house was already humming like a hot transformer. The mixer was whipping egg whites, the oven was purring like an old pickup truck on a country road, Jessica was slamming a knife on the pomegranate granite cutting board, separating sprigs of thyme. Allison sniffed the air. It smelled of sage, lemon, and fear. She kept the last ingredient deep within herself, filling the bottles with new energy. She turned the music up louder, smiled at her daughter more often, and went to the pantry to quietly exhale while no one was looking. Ryan Hale, their girl's fiancé, was supposed to arrive at 6 in the evening. It was 5 hours and 43 minutes until that moment when Allison made a to-do list to keep everything going according to plan, a habitual way of keeping panicky thoughts caged. Check out Jessica's bread casserole. Chop fresh herbs, dill into water to prevent them from wilting. Clean the oven door glass. David always notices stains. Light candles that smell like vetiver rather than eucalyptus. Jessica says eucalyptus overpowers the scent of baking. Change clothes, no purple shades, even if the painting, The Trembling Door, hangs in the studio. It does not need another reference to the lighthouse. Smile, breathe, don't drop the cups. She wrote point 7, but then crossed out, check Ryan's last name. Late. Allison tucked the list into her denim skirt pocket. The anxiety in my chest spread like water from an empty kettle, clear but inevitable. Jessica stood frozen in front of the oven. Her sleeves were rolled up above her elbows. Her hair was pulled back into a bun. Her face was filled with flour and blush at the same time. On her ring, the sapphire caught the reflection of the lamp, and each ray pierced Allison painfully. It flashed like a lighthouse signal from the rocks, the same edges, the same color. "Mom, check the temperature. The blackberry pie cannot be dried out," the daughter asked and handed over the thermometer. Of course, Bunny. Allison hugged her shoulders. Her own hand trembled. "You are shining today." "I'm nervous," Jessica admitted. "But it's so nice." He wrote from the road. "I'm already at the highway through the pine trees, heading towards the center of the universe." Funny. Allison nodded, making a mental note. Through the pines, the only road from Astoria to Carson Creek, along which she had once returned in the dawn fog. "Is Dad helping?" Jess asked. "David is cutting cheese and checking the lantern at the entrance," Allison answered. "He will come and give advice as if you were organizing a summit at the UN." Jess giggled. and Allison found herself laughing as loudly as if everything was fine. A false note, but no one heard. David Harper sat by the fireplace and measured the distance between the sofa and the coffee table with a centimeter, as if he was preparing a construction report. He was wearing a dark blue shirt, which he wore for church holidays, a neat collar, cufflinks with pine cones. The sofa should be moved towards the wall, there will be more space, he muttered under his breath. It's like we're giving a presentation, Allison noted, placing a vase of field irises on the stand. I want everything to look strong. He smiled, but his eyes were still shifting, and Allison guessed her husband's concern. The young man must see that this house is stable. Persistent. Like me, David, she didn't say. Will you see that I am also persistent? She held her breath to keep the words from falling out. By 4:15, Allison had completed all the steps up to number 5. The 6th, don't drop the cups, she checked every 5 minutes, cupping the mug of chamomile tea with her palms and making sure it was standing still. A notification flashed annoyingly on my phone. 2 years ago. The stupid archive reminded me of unanswered letters. She tried to delete the contact, her finger trembled. The screen asked, delete. Allison clicked cancel. At 4:30, Jessica went to change clothes. I want to be in green, Ryan says. I'm like moss on a rock in the fog. Well, let it be. The house fell silent. Allison stayed in the kitchen. The old telephone's light gave off a faint yellow light. Almost no one used the stationary device. She picked up the phone, dialed the familiar prefix +1971, burned herself with the numbers as if she had touched a bare wire, and hung up. If this is that Ryan, will she hear the familiar whisper of the surf in his voice? If not, why is she afraid? She wiped her palms on a cotton towel. Anxiety stretched out like a creaking piano string. At 15 minutes to 5, David was checking his mailbox when he heard the sound of tires on gravel. The engine was turned off. The neighbor's dog squealed joyfully. He always reacted to strangers. Allison stood frozen in the hallway, holding the kitchen doorknob. Jessica ran down from above and pulled down her dress, her cheeks flushed. He has arrived, she whispered with such trepidation, as if announcing the arrival of a comet. David pulled down the cedar marked calm. Behave naturally, he asked his wife and daughter. Naturally, a word that rarely went along with the electricity under Allison's skin. The maple tree, favored by the woodpecker, creaked quietly in the breeze. The evening light, pouring through, ignited the leaves with an orange fire. This flame seemed to roll onto the porch when the door finally opened and the guest appeared. A tall silhouette, a black beanie in his hand, hair as black as whetstones, serious brown eyes slightly clouded with a slight hoarseness of fatigue from the road. On the cheekbone there is a thin scar through an uneven mole. A shirt the color of seafoam, on top of which is an inconspicuous Harrington jacket. In his hand is a narrow box tied with a rope, like a bag from a craft shop. Allison felt time slip away like a board beneath her feet. It was him. The same scar, the same eyelashes, the same slight, almost invisible tension in the shoulders. When he noticed something important, now he noticed her. And Ryan stopped too. Found out. His face showed shock a second, but longer than any slow-motion frame. He blinked as if hoping it was a visual error. No errors. Jessica didn't notice the pause, it was too fleeting. She stepped forward, kissed him on the cheek, and turned to her parents. Mom, Dad, this is Ryan. David, straightening his shoulders in a businesslike manner, extended his hand. Ryan took it. The handshake was strong. Only Allison saw his fingers tremble for a split second as skin touched skin. Nice to meet you, Ryan said in a low, husky voice, and a shiver from the previous nights ran through Allison's vertebrae. Come in, she said, and her voice sounded evenly, although wave after wave was breaking everything inside. Take off your jacket, it's warm here. Thank you, Mrs. Harper, he replied, nodding. Miss is an important, frighteningly correct form. No Ellie, no whispers of June woman. He spoke as if he had seen her for the first time. But the eyes contained the entire ocean, where they once drowned in the summer storm. They entered the living room. The sofa stood in a new place, the candles burned evenly, vetiver mixed with the aroma of wine. Jessica chatted, the sound of a running stream, as if she were reading a press release about the weather and plans for the fall. Dad, Ryan loves locksmith techniques. He repairs old cameras himself. David nodded and listened. Ryan answered, his gaze occasionally sliding to the painting in the corner. Not the trembling door, another, small canvas with a lighthouse in a foggy dawn. Allison wrote it before the novel, but the paint is the same purple, the same tangerine flashes. He read her thoughts and raised an eyebrow just barely. Allison felt her insides freeze. Tick-tock, the clock on the wall loudly entered into a dialogue. The stove exhaled warm air. Jessica rubbed her palm against the fabric of her dress, happy or worried, it's hard to say. David asked, "It seems you needed some time on the way?" 3 hours with a stop for coffee, sir, Ryan replied. Sir. Granite politeness between the dunes of memories. Allison finally pulled herself together. I'll go check on the pie, she said, and headed towards the kitchen. On the way, she touched the table with her elbow and the glass shook. Hidden point 6 bis, don't drop the glass, almost failed. Ryan instantly grabbed the glass, a precise movement, as if a couple of years had not passed since he also caught the pallet that had fallen near the cliff. They exchanged glances. His eyes spoke, remember, her keep quiet. Jessica clapped. Wow, a miracle reflex. David chuckled. The moment of awkwardness passed for sleight of hand. Allison's heart sank. She went into the kitchen. As I entered, I felt the walls of the kitchen collapse. The pie was fine, but she opened the oven as if she were saving the dish from certain destruction. Inside, amidst the smell of blackberries, she could breathe. She grabbed the towel and clasped her hands. We had to return to the guests in a minute and bring the plates. But my legs wouldn't move. How? Why? Thoughts whispered at the pace of a hummingbird. How many threads does fate bring into one knot? If she speaks, everything will collapse. The marriage, her daughter's trust, her own idea of who she is now. If he remains silent, will he live? Will David ever find out why Ryan has that familiar twinkle in his eye? Voices are heard through the crack in the door. David asks about working on the documentary. Ryan answers confidently, calmly, like someone who rehearsed a conversation that evening. Jessica laughs. Allison closed her eyes. Somewhere in the depths, an old chain clanged. There was a feared dancer in a cage. But patience and duty stood nearby. She pulled out the serving plates, exhaled, and lifted her chin. You are strong, she whispered to herself. The painting is not finished yet. With a tray of dishes, Allison walked into the living room. Time spread its wings, ready to bring down a storm, but so far everything was held on by a thin thread. Ryan stood up to help her. They exchanged a polite smile, the picture of a friendly acquaintance. The ring on Jessica's finger flashed between them like an equal sign that no one dared cross out. They set out plates, spoons, forks. David poured wine, and when the glasses rose to the level of their hearts, Jessica said, "For a family that is getting bigger." The glass clinked as it touched the glass. Allison raised her glass, took a sip, and caught Ryan's gaze over the rim. He was calm, but a question flashed in the depths. What now? There was no answer. Only the fractional beat of her pulse and the click of the clock. The blade of silence vibrated subtly between them, invisible to the others. On this threshold with cake, glasses, and vetiver candles, history holds its breath. Everything said next will have a price, but for now, not a word. Only the slight trembling of closed doors that they both heard. There was silence in the room, as if all sounds asked permission before being born. The plates of mushroom soup shook slightly from the vibration of the refrigerator, but David was the first to break the silence. I hope you like it, Ryan. It's hard to grab the chanterelles this year. He moved the cup away so as not to touch the napkin. The soup is excellent, sir, Ryan replied, taking a spoon. Although, you know, in the north of British Columbia, the chanterelles are even more capricious. If the temperature drops a couple of degrees, the film of ice crunches louder than the camera shutter. Jessica perked up. You managed to film there during the expedition to the glacier, right? There I learned, if relationships in the team freeze, no chemical heating pads will save the frame. Ryan glanced at Allison. The corners of his mouth twitched, as if he was waiting for a response. Allison squeezed the spoon slightly. She spoke, trying to keep her voice even. Jess and I sometimes argue when we draw together. I call it the creative frost, but then hot chocolate fixes everything. Hot chocolate and honesty, Ryan chuckled. Honesty always adds a couple of degrees. David nodded slightly, as if in agreement, but noted nonetheless. In our inspection, honesty is measured by the thickness of the beam. If the metal is cracked, it cannot be repaired. An interesting metaphor, Mr. Harper, Ryan said, stroking the edge of the plate with his palm. Sometimes there is a crack in a relationship, and a person tries to hide it with fresh paint. Allison felt the soup suddenly taste bitter. She caught her husband's gaze and waved. Let's not talk about cracks, but about eggplants. Lasagna is already on the way. The second was served with the warm smell of oregano and cheese. Jessica placed a generous piece on Ryan's plate and smiled. The secret is to soak the eggplants longer. The bitterness comes out. Eggplants are tricky. Ryan bit off the edge and, as if by chance, added, the bitterness sometimes reveals itself late when you can't change the recipe. David raised an eyebrow. Are you talking about cooking or about the production plan? About everything, probably, Ryan grinned. In a documentary, if you make a mistake with the light, the whole material will turn bitter. It's the same in life. Allison chimed in. I once oversalted the soup so much that Jess refused to eat it until the two of us made a new one. As you can see, the recipe can be rewritten. Mom saved dinner, Jessica said, sending her mother a grateful look. What did you say then, Dad? Does it take time for the water to come to your mill? Almost, David laughed. Salt sticks better to little things. Ryan slowly rolled his shoulders as if he was stretching his joints. Sometimes the little things make all the difference. One missing bolt and the bridge falls. Allison put her glass down on the table, a little louder than she intended. Speaking of bridges, Jess, will you show your parents the new pictures? Certainly. The girl was delighted and opened the laptop. A foggy Portland morning flashed across the screen. Jessica commented on the frames, but for Allison, all the light in the room narrowed to a single point. Ryan stood behind her daughter, leaning so close that the thin chain around his neck flashed before her eyes, the same one that she had once held with 2 fingers, sitting in the car in the rain. Ryan pointed to a gray photo of an old lighthouse. Look, there is no fire, but he still takes the boats out. The lighthouse lives even in darkness, he said quietly. I like the emptiness of the frame, Jessica noted. I wanted to show that light can be imagined. Allison winced. Ryan's low whisper sounded like a password. The lighthouse lives even in darkness. She caught his gaze and saw a question in it. Remember how we turned off the lights to listen to the sea? She answered silently. Don't you dare. David praised the composition and then raised his glass. I propose a toast, because one successful shot can change your destiny. The main thing is to set the exposure correctly. Ryan smiled slightly, raised his wine, and, looking at Allison again, added, and for the fact that exposure is sometimes saved by a filter that is not noticeable to anyone. The glass clinked softly. Allison took a sip too quickly. The wine burned my throat. Blackberry pie smelled like sugar and home. Jessica cut it carefully, as if cropping a photograph. Ryan took a narrow box from his pocket. A small gift, he said, handing it to her. Viewfinder from the old Rolleiflex. Let it help you look more broadly. God, Ryan, he's rare, the girl exclaimed. Thank you. She rushed to kiss him. The sapphire flashed between their hands. Allison felt her heart beating like a drum in a parade. David smiled happily at the young and purposeful plot, not noticing his wife's trembling. As Ryan said goodbye, he shook David's hand. Thank you for the warm welcome. We are used to keeping the house open, answered the husband. Come more often. Ryan turned to Allison and nodded briefly. Thank you, Mrs. Harper. The pie is excellent. Try on the road, she said quietly. In response, a thin, almost invisible smile. I am always attentive to signs. The door closed, the headlights slid across the maple tree and disappeared. The tension settled like dust after a collapse. Jessica flew up to her, taking away the box and glowing eyes. David turned off the kitchen light and kissed Allison's temple. Good guy. A little strange humor, but worthy of our girl. Yes, she whispered and felt her lips go slightly numb. Are you tired? He asked. It's still exciting. I'll wash the dishes quickly. David nodded and went upstairs. The water clicked on the plates. Every reflection on the glass seemed to contain a reflection of Ryan's scar. Allison touched the same glass that he had caught at the last moment. The glass vibrated under his fingers as if it remembered his palm. The night gave no rest. The clock showed 2:37 when Allison stood up. The curtains shook in the wind. Behind them, the headlights flickered nearby. She looked out and saw a dark green car standing on the side of the road. Moonlight slid across the windshield. The phone lit up. R. You can still hear, right? She read. Fingers tapped on the screen. Not now. Don't write. The answer came. Thank you for dinner. I'll be careful. But frames cannot be deleted. They can only be overexposed. She gritted her teeth. Don't. Understood. The door is shaking, but I won't go in. The notification disappeared along with the headlights, which slid towards the forest and went out behind the trees. Sleep never came. I remembered the details, the collar of the jacket that smelled of cedar, icy motel air conditioning, grains of sand stuck to her heels as they laughed in the morning drizzle. A scene at the lighthouse arose before my eyes. I love you, whispered through the roar of the surf, and as she said there, this is a granite wall. Now the wall stood behind the next door frame, where David dozed, suspecting nothing. Closer to dawn, a woodpecker began drumming on a maple tree. Allison quietly walked into the studio. Where the next layer of purple paint was supposed to dry, old strokes of tangerine appeared. She took a palette knife and tried to scrape off the top layer. The paint peeled off, revealing the previous design. No matter how many layers you put, the very first one will still remain under them. She unfolded a new canvas and sketched 2 doors with charcoal. One was tightly closed, the other was slightly open. Behind the gap, there was still darkness, without the ocean, without the motel, without the sapphire ring. With every stroke, the heart beats more steadily. Fear respects those who continue to create. The coffee maker began to hum in the kitchen. David woke up earlier than usual. The house lived as always, and there was an island of stability in it. Allison set the coals aside, washed her hands, and looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the oven. We can handle it, she whispered to herself and turned off the light in the workshop. The door behind him shook slightly, but remained closed. It reminded me, as Ryan said, of a frame that has already been shot, and now you just need to decide whether to develop it to the end or leave the film in the dark. The century-old maple tree outside the window rustled with its young leaves, but the day promised heat, a rarity for humid Carson Creek. Allison opened all the windows wide. It seemed that the fresh air would drive out the anxiety that had settled in the house since the last dinner, but the draft only raised the curtains and scattered the sheets of her sketches. For the 4th evening in a row, Ryan came to them. He either brought Jessica new filters or called her for a couple of shots at the waterfall. David, flattered by the attention to his daughter, joked about his enthusiastic son-in-law, and Allison felt that every visit was a test of endurance. At exactly 4:30, the brake squeaked. Allison was moving her brush from palette to canvas when she heard quick footsteps on the porch and her daughter's enthusiastic voice. Paradise, you made it earlier. The road is clear when you know all the turns. Greenery, he answered. Zelionka is his new term of endearment for Jessica. Allison associated it only with the thick antiseptic that was once used to treat scratches. They walked into the kitchen, Jess beaming with freckles, Ryan holding a leather case under his arm. Mom, look. Jessica pulled out an old Pentax film with accordion bellows from the case. We'll test it today. Rai is confident that such soft focus will be suitable for portraits. If you bring a camera, bring patience too. Allison grinned, hiding her trembling. Ryan put the camera on the table and turned to her. Would you like to pose, Mrs. Harper? Film loves people who know how to keep secrets. The phrase slid across Allison's mind like the edge of a cold blade. She noticed that on his wrist was the same leather bracelet that she had once chosen for him at the fair at the pier. Then he said that the node stores all the roads to the ocean. The knot was now tied tighter than before. Mom and I have things to do today, Jessica intervened. You need to print a brochure for the exhibition. It's a pity, Ryan almost whispered, but loud enough for Allison to hear. Sometimes the answer is hidden in the vulnerability of a portrait. He smiled at Jessica, cleanly, openly, and the girl flushed with exactly that shade that her mother knew all too well. Allison pretended to look for something in a drawer and heard Ryan quietly humming a tune, a faint trippy folk tune from their trips to the lighthouse, as he removed the lens cap. She clenched her teeth. An hour later they returned. Jessica, with traces of moisture on the knees of her jeans and a pile of damp film, Ryan with a double portion of wet sand on her shoes. We climbed right under the waterfall. My daughter said excitedly, taking off her jacket. You should have seen the light, Mom. The fog was spinning like a fog machine, and Paradise caught a drop on the 100th part of Endurance. 64th, Ryan said softly. He placed the lid of the thermos on the table. Coffee with cinnamon. I remembered how much you love it. Cinnamon hit Allison's nose, and time rewinded. The back seat of the Subaru, their knees touching in the semi-darkness, and the same smell. Politely, David muttered, entering from the garage. There's only sand on your shoes, Ryan. Lay down a rug, otherwise scratches will remain. Ryan obediently took off his shoes. His socks were denim-colored, with small white seagulls on them. The same ones, Allison flashed. She remembered making fun of the kindergarten ornament. He then replied, Seagulls know that screaming is part of freedom. Jessica continued, Dad, are you expecting us for dinner? We want to go to Portland to develop the film. Rye arranged for a dark room at Silvergreen. It's 2 hours one way, David noted. With a cowboy behind the wheel, 1 hour and 50, Ryan winked. Either way, be careful. Allison intervened. The road is serpentine, and the sun sets early. Don't be afraid, Mrs. Harper. Ryan slowly looked up at her. I see the road further than it seems. The phrase froze in the air. Jessica laughed, taking it as a joke, but Allison felt her heart beating so loudly it was almost audible. In the evening, when the engine of their car died away in the distance, Allison called the Silvergrain studio. The administrator replied, there were no reservations for today, so he lied. She hung up and saw David standing in the doorway. Why are you like this? Asked the husband. I'm just worried. The road is long. Agree, he chuckled. Although, I must admit, the guy drives confidently, sometimes even too much. Allison wanted to say, he's too much about everything, but she swallowed. Listen, Al, David lowered his voice. You don't trust Ryan? Not that. It's just strange so quickly. She loves him, he shrugged. Do you remember how your mother looked at me? Allison's eyes darkened. If only he knew what her mother was really worried about. Please trust Jessica, David asked quietly. Allison tried to smile and went into the workshop. There was a smell of turpentine and something else sharp, barely perceptible. The 2 doors were still waiting on the easel, but the hand did not rise to continue. She grabbed an old brush and mindlessly drew a line across the canvas, which turned into a trembling crack. The house fell silent. The clock showed 10:11 p.m. when Allison heard her phone vibrate on the kitchen counter. Message from Jessica. The dark room is busy, but we found an alternative. We'll be back late, love it. Next came another one, this time from an unknown number, but she knew whose. Seagulls scream when the shore is close. She decided not to answer. Insomnia still did not subside, and she went into the living room. The lights of an approaching car were reflected in the window. At 1:38 a.m., the headlights turned off the engine, but the doors did not slam. Allison pulled back the curtain to reveal Ryan sitting in the driver's seat and Jessica resting her head on his shoulder. The car stood there like a movie screensaver without an ending. A few minutes passed, then they left. The daughter was laughing. Ryan was whispering something. He put his arm around her waist, and the sapphire sparkled under the light of the street lamp. Allison found herself wanting to run outside and drag her daughter away before it was too late. But she froze. It flashed in my head. This is exactly how their own romance began: a night road, a lantern, laughter, a hand on the waist. She angrily grabbed the windowsill with her fingers. Jessica, not noticing anything alarming, waved to her father, who came down to check the gate and flew up the steps. Ryan paused on the porch and looked straight out the dark window, as if he knew where she had hidden. Then he raised his finger to his lips, a gesture of silence, and left. The next morning, Jessica, beaming, told her mother how the satin light in the abandoned hangar made the shots magical. Allison listened, reminding herself to breathe. Ryan came up with the series Reflections in Abandoned Mirrors. He's a genius. Abandoned places keep other people's secrets, Allison said, and her daughter answered, laughing. It's all the more interesting to pull stories out of there. At noon, Ryan sent a message addressed to both parents. I invite you to see how I set up a laboratory in your laundry room. I want to see the footage come to life in front of the family's eyes. David responded with an enthusiastic, of course, and Allison's mouth went dry. Ryan persistently worked his way into every corner of their lives. By 6 in the evening, he was standing by their washing machine, pouring developer into the tank as if conducting a sacrament. Jessica, mesmerized, illuminated the process with a red darkroom lamp while Allison held the timer. The smell of chemicals, like the smell of 19 years, Ryan said and looked at her. Adult freedom begins with him. And the skin smells of phenidone for a long time, she answered without raising her head. For some, the smell reminds me of the sea, he continued, and only she realized that he was talking about nights in a motel, where the air conditioning mixed bleach and salt. 20 minutes later, the frames were dry. Jessica was looking at the prints where the crowns of the trees were reflected in the puddles. In one of the frames, Allison saw her figure in the window of their kitchen, the shadow of which should not have been. Ryan was photographing the house when she stood by the curtain. He grabbed her without permission, just as he had stolen her movements on the beach. Jessica admired the composition, and Allison saw a trap. Late in the evening, the three of them sat at the table with Coco. David was dozing in front of the TV. Ryan talked about the Oregon Quiet Roads project. Sometimes you drive for hours and don't see any cars, he said. There you can shout out something that cannot be said out loud, and the sound will disappear into the fog. What if someone else hears the scream? Allison asked. This means that this someone has been driving nearby for a long time, he answered quietly, and Jessica, swallowing her cocoa, was not at all wary. After midnight, Ryan left. Allison chained the door for the first time in years. The phone flashed. The seagulls screamed. The shore is getting closer. She turned off the device. In the darkness of the bedroom, David whispered, Ryan, weird, but kind, right? Allison didn't answer. My heart was pounding like a hammer on a rusty bracket. Under her eyelids there was a frame, her own shadow in the window, caught by someone else's lens. She realized Ryan was rebuilding his story, frame by frame. Jessica is a new perspective, and she is a hidden layer of old film. If he continues, the crack will become reality, and only she knows how deep the abyss is. There were 2 frames on the nightstand, a closed door and a slightly open one. Allison took the charcoal and drew a third. The door is wide open, but behind it is not a lighthouse or the sea, but the mirror surface of a lens aimed directly at the viewer. The mirror looked back. She realized the subtle hints were over the next frame would be brighter than the flash. In the morning, the house smelled of developer. The chemical was still soaking into the crevices of the laundry room from yesterday's session, and Allison couldn't shake the feeling that the inside of the walls was lined with wet photographic paper. Jessica left at dawn to catch the golden hour on the cliff, and David left for an unscheduled check of the city substation. For the first time in a week, Allison was alone and hoped to get to the workshop before her thoughts scattered. The phone beeped at exactly 9. Coffee in second chapter in 20. We need to discuss an idea for Jess's exhibition. R. It was easy to refuse, but she already knew that Ryan would stand on the porch if she didn't come, and she knew that the conversation about the exhibition was a screen. The bookstore greeted us with the smell of mulled wine and paper. Ryan sat at the farm table, facing the doors so he could see her first. As she approached, he looked up, a mixture of greeting and challenge. "Thank you for taking the time," he said, and pushed a cup of cappuccino toward her. "Without cinnamon. I remember you don't need cinnamon today." "Speak," Allison responded, remaining standing. "Sit down. From the outside, this should be a conversation about creativity." She slowly sat down on the chair. Stanley was busy at the register. 2 schoolchildren were whispering near the comic book rack. Ryan chose a moment when no one was looking and covered her hand with his. "You're painting yourself into a corner, Al. The more you are silent, the louder the silence." She pulled her hand away. "This is my family. And Jessica?" Ryan raised an eyebrow. "She is also part of your family, but also my future wife." The words cut through the air coldly and evenly. "She will have a different life," Allison said, "without your repetitions." "Repetitions? No, this is a remix. You and I once didn't dare to turn on the light. I'll turn it on now. Are you blackmailing me?" "I offer honesty." Ryan's voice was soft and metallic. "For everyone. You tell the story, and we shoot the shot without a filter. You'll kill her trust." "And you didn't kill him when you hid the truth?" He leaned back in his chair. "Imagine what she finds out from someone else. From me? From a random postcard that she finds in your album. What will hurt more?" Allison swallowed. "What do you want? So that you stop seeing me as a ghost. I'm not looking for revenge." "I love her," he said slowly, as if he was tasting the word. "And yes, I still love what you and I were. These are not mutually exclusive things. Love is not a collection of postcards. It has boundaries. Don't be ridiculous. Borders were invented by those who are afraid of maps without coastlines." He took a small envelope from his jacket. I put it on the table. "There are 3 photographs here. One, you are against the background of the lighthouse. The second is your shadow in the kitchen window 3 days ago. The third is an empty road where we said goodbye. Photos without captions. Any one of them can be hung on the wall of Jess's exhibition." "You won't dare." "I don't want to. But if you continue to pretend that we are a mistake, the photograph will find an audience." Stanley coughed at the register. Ryan smoothly covered the envelope with a napkin as if nothing had happened. "Do you know what's the most interesting thing about developing?" He continued in a normal tone. "The image appears pale at first, but it cannot be removed. It can either be strengthened or ruined forever." "Where is Jessica?" Allison asked, feeling an emptiness in her chest from the cold. "Filming Dawn at Emerald Cleave. Mobile communications there are spotty." He snapped his fingers. "She's doing well. What do you demand from me?" "The 3 of us are going to meet in the evening. You, me, David. Let's tell the truth as it is. No motel details, no sentimentality. We were close before you. And then it's their decision. Do you want me to tell my husband about the affair? Right at dinner?" "At dinner. At the same table where we ate lasagna. No cameras needed, just enough witnesses." She closed her eyes for a second. She saw David's face when he realized whose bracelet she had once given. "I saw a sapphire on my daughter's hand, which would collapse like a shard of ice. What if I refuse? Then the envelope will go to Jess's dormitory mailbox. Or to the editorial office, the Organian where Is She Dreaming?" He shrugged. "Stories love sensations." Allison stood up. The chair squeaked. "Lo. Lo is living behind the scenes," Ryan answered calmly. "Let the light develop the film, and it will become cleaner than shadow. In the evening at 7. I'll come." She stepped towards the door, but he called out, "Elle, a lie is worse than the sound of the surf in your ears. It drowns out everything else. Think about it. It smelled like a thunderstorm outside. The sky over Carson Creek was turning leaden, even though the forecast was for a clear day. Allison walked without looking at her feet until she stopped at a hardware store window. Her face was reflected on the glass, both feminine and almost unfamiliar. The house greeted her with the sound of a clock. She took out a postcard from the album A Lighthouse and an inscription. Even closed doors vibrate. How many times had she taken it as a warning? It turned out it was a timer. At 3:30, David returned, tired and surprised. "Are you okay?" "There are 3 silent beeps on the answering machine." "We should talk in the evening," she said, and for the first time in many years, she looked into her husband's eyes for so long that she felt their common foundation shake. "About what?" "About old photographs," she answered. He wanted to ask another question, but the work phone rang, and David had to go into the office. Allison went up to the workshop. 3 doors trembled on the easel, and everything inside told me the 4th would be a window opening. She took the coal and drew a line. The line came out firm. By evening, the house undertakes to become a camera obscura, where the hidden will turn into a reverse image. As the clock hand approached 5, a message came from Jessica. "I'll be back later. Paradise caught a broken tripod chain, fixing it. I love it." Allison felt the emptiness in her chest echoing emptily. Her time was compressed. She took out her phone and found contact R. The fingers hesitated. She dialed, "At 7, but I'll tell you myself." The answer came instantly. "The door is open." Allison closed her eyes, inhaling the smell of developer that seemed like it would never go away. In the evening, she will put all the frames on the table at once and let the exposure show what their pictures are worth. Let the developer be honest and the fixer be what remains after. The rain promised by the weather report never came, but the air in the house thickened as if before a thunderstorm. For Sunday dinner, Allison baked rosemary chicken, a ritual that always made for a cozy evening. The smell was supposed to unite, but it turned out the opposite. The spicy aroma only emphasized how intensely each of them was breathing. Jessica was the first to sense something strange. She put the glasses on the table and noticed that her mother hardly raised her eyes from under her dark eyelashes. Allison removed the pan as if concentrating on the fragility of the crust. The slightest movement and everything would fall apart. Ryan, meanwhile, walked around the living room, looking at the photographs on the walls, but his eyes kept returning to the kitchen door to Allison. When their eyes met, the temperature in the room seemed to change. The glass on the window fogged up from the inside, although there was no steam. Jessica decided to turn her attention to her father. David decorated the salad with sprigs of parsley, but the leaves lay unevenly. His hands were shaking, like a person who is cold. He asked Ryan something about camera stabilizers, but the question came out vaguely, and the answer sounded like Ryan was answering out of place. "I'm still thinking about getting a 3-axis gimbal," said David, trying to smile. "Someone keeps shaking the picture." "Sometimes it's better to see the trembling," Ryan answered and glanced at Allison. "She brings the frame to life." The words sounded harmless, but the mother's eyebrow twitches involuntarily. Jessica caught this movement out of the corner of her eye, and for the first time felt anxiety rising in her chest, small, like an air bubble under glass. They sat down at the table. Allison was pouring white wine, and her hand trembled slightly. A drop slid down the stem of the wine glass. Ryan held out a napkin, touching her fingers. It was a quick, almost casual gesture, but Jessica noticed that her mother flinched more than necessary. She looked at Ryan, and he, as if nothing had happened, gave her a smile, soft, confident. Too confident. The bubble moved in my chest again and became larger. The conversation began about the usual: an exhibition in the city, grants, paper costs. Ryan listened to his daughter, interjected comments, but every time Allison said a phrase, he held his gaze a little longer than expected. No outside observer would have guessed it, but Jessica knew her mother's body language well. Allison's shoulder blades would clench as if from the cold when she felt an emotional blow, and now her shoulders would tremble every time Ryan continued a phrase he had spoken to the two of them. "In portraits," he said, hiding a smile. The main thing is honesty. The light may flatter, but the look reveals everything. Not always, Allison objected quietly. There are things that the lens does not see. Or I haven't had time to manifest it yet, he added. David looked up from his plate. Are you talking about the film or about people? Ryan shrugged. Sometimes it's the same thing. The phrase hung like a heavy curtain. Jessica felt that there was no longer a bubble in her chest at all, but a hardening lump. She wanted to say something light, to joke, but the words stuck. After dinner, Allison quickly went into the kitchen to wash the dishes. Jessica, while clearing away the plates, suddenly bumped shoulders with Ryan in the doorway. He whispered, "It seems Mom is tired. She needs to work less." "Mom always works hard," Jessica answered, looking warily into his eyes. "It's like you've known this for a long time." "You can see artists right away," he said and smiled as if he had stated the obvious. But there was something else in the tone that made it impossible to fully believe. She entered the kitchen. Allison stood at the sink, haphazardly scrubbing the same plate until the china began to squeak. The water flowed and flowed. Jessica touched her elbow. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Of course," Allison tried to smile. The smile was more effort than warmth. "You don't like him?" the daughter asked, and the words themselves frightened her. The mother put the plate down. "Darling, he is your choice. I'm just tired today. Everything is fine." The mother's eyes said otherwise. Before the whirlwind of innuendo, Jessica took a step back. She loved Ryan for his courage and because he made her feel the world brighter. But now, for the first time, I thought, does he feel her the same way? Or does he see in her only a reflection of something for which she does not know the name? At night, she tried to use an old playlist. Usually the music was soothing, but a slightly blurred whisper seemed to leak from the headphones. She turned off the phone, turned to the wall, but could not fall asleep for a long time. Micro scenes popped up in my head. The first time Ryan said green and his mother froze. How today at the table she shuddered from a small touch. The way Ryan's gaze lingered on the painting, the trembling door, hanging in the corner of the studio for too long, as if he recognized the place. At midnight, Jessica came down to drink water. Downstairs, there was a dim light from the kitchen. Mother was sitting at the table, holding an old photograph in her hands. Her fingers were trembling. When Jessica stepped onto the tile, Allison abruptly hid the photo under her palm. "Are you awake?" the mother asked in a whisper. I wanted water. Jessica took a sip, trying to act natural. "Is something bothering you?" "It's okay," Allison breathed too quickly. "Go rest, sunshine. Get up early tomorrow." The daughter nodded, but turned around on the steps. The mother was sitting with her head buried in her hands, and her eyes, even from afar, sparkled like wet asphalt. A light sound came from above. From the guest room, the former workshop, Ryan was walking back and forth. The floorboards creaked low, viscously. Jessica lay down in bed and thought for the first time. What if the camera she loves so much is capable of capturing more than her heart is ready to see? She closed her eyes, but behind her eyelids that gaze continued to flash, flying between her mother and Ryan like a thread of someone else's secret code. And the thread stretched and stretched until it touched her own wrists. The house was breathing quietly, but under this silence the first crack was growing even thinner than a hair, but already audible to someone whose ear was tuned to the bottom of the frame. Monday morning began with a burning smell. The toaster, bought before Jessica was born, had finally given up and browned the bread to charcoal crumbs. Allison mechanically tapped the body, as if this could release the day's nervousness. The refrigerator door clicked behind her. Ryan, barefoot and disheveled, was pouring himself some orange juice. In a gray t-shirt, he looked younger and lighter. It seemed as if the night had erased all the shadows from his face. He raised the glass to his lips, but before taking a sip, he looked straight at Allison. "In the morning you look like fresh heaven," he said quietly, watching her collect crumbs. "Or rather, for a storm a minute before a thunderstorm. I'm still eager for the storm." The words sounded so intimate, as if the common weather was stored between them. Allison didn't answer, just put the burnt toast in the trash. My hands were shaking more than I should have admitted. "One moment," Ryan continued. He stepped closer, took a strand of her hair from the tabletop, caught in the collar of her robe, and slowly released the strand into place. The movement was almost affectionate. She took half a step back. "Can I help you, Mom?" Jessica rushed in with a camera at the ready. "Hey, did the toaster burn the bread again?" Ryan, as if nothing had happened, turned to the bride. "This is a sign. It's time to switch to morning smoothies." A crust of coal suits few people. Jessica laughed, and breakfast continued as if nothing had happened. David, still in his work uniform, was scrolling through the news on his tablet. His "good morning" sounded absent-minded. By noon, only David remained in the house. He was filling out a report while chewing a cold pizza crust. Allison went to the studio, but couldn't paint the brush was catching the air. She went outside to clear her head and saw Ryan in the garage. He studied David's old Mustang, running his hand over the rusty fender. There was no trace of him left in the morning flirting. His face was tense. The corner of his mouth was hard. He turned around at the sound of footsteps. A glance, heavy and cold, like the sight of a lens, slid over her and walked past her, as if point blank he didn't recognize her. "What are you doing here?" Allison asked, preparing for a new portion of ambiguity. "I see how old the car is," he answered dryly. "I wonder how much corrosion the metal can withstand if no one can see it from the inside." "This is David's hobby. He will put everything in order." "Everyone has their own hobby," Ryan snorted and walked towards the house, without designing her with an additional word or glance. The air behind me seemed to have cooled. After lunch, Ryan and Jessica left to film the episode Reflections in Forgotten Windows. Allison stayed with David. He was lifting a toolbox into the attic. "I noticed," he said, shaking out the dust from his brushes, "the good guy turned out to be a mechanic. He says he'll try to order pads from Mustang." "Yes?" Allison couldn't find what to say and glanced out the window. Their SUV was taxiing onto the highway. Jessica was waving her hand. Ryan, driving, glanced at the rearview mirror. Allison involuntarily retreated behind the curtain. David noticed movement. "It's like you're avoiding him," he muttered. "Is it not easy to see how a child grows? Are you worried she'll make a hasty decision?" "Probably," Allison nodded, not daring to admit that the reason for the anxiety was not the timing of the engagement. David sighed and put his arm around her shoulders. "We can handle it, Al. Do you remember how your father considered me the guy with no future? Time arranges everything. There will be a place for Ryan, too." Allison nodded, feeling like an actress whose only job was to remain silent until the final scene. At dusk, the alien Subaru rustled its tires on the gravel again. On the porch, Ryan held a bouquet of wild sunflowers. The warm yellow color suited Jessica. David picked up a bag of developing chemicals and entered the house. Allison remained on the threshold. Ryan smiled at her as if out of politeness, but an icy glint flashed in his eyes. "Nice light today," he said gloomily. "You would paint it if you picked up your brushes again." "I only write what I want to see," she answered. "Do you see?" Ryan leaned on the railing. Sometimes the artist closes his eyes when the paint is too bright. Before she could retort, Jessica called them over for dinner. Inside, under the blinding light of the lamps, Ryan was transformed again. He enthusiastically told David about how he was replacing a broken tripod with 2 boards and a bicycle chain, and after dinner he unexpectedly raised a toast to the most inspiring family in Northern Oregon. Allison noticed how her husband's palm relaxed on the table. David considered that the heat was rising in the stove of comfort, not suspecting how fickle the flame was. When Jessica went to wash the film in the laundry room, Ryan leaned over to Allison. "Today the stars are clear. Want to watch? I have great binoculars in the back seat." The voice was soft, like a morning compliment, but there was a squint in the eyes. She felt an invisible rope stretch between him and the dark courtyard. "Thanks, no need," Allison replied, keeping her breathing even. "As you say." He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms over his chest, and his face became stony. I thought you liked to look at the sky. Allison looked down. David returned with empty glasses, and Ryan immediately changed his tone, asking busily about the space of the new warehouse. Not a second of awkwardness, as if the ice on the lake had been replaced with transparent glass. At night, Allison woke up from a muffled creaking sound. She went out into the corridor. The door of the former workshop was slightly open. Ryan sat at her desk and looked at the photographs, the same ones from the envelope. The light from the night lamp illuminated the harsh shadows. He didn't notice her right away. He looked for a long time, blinking rarely, as if he was deciding which frame to throw into the developer's water first. "You're like a ghost," he said without turning around, knowing for sure that she was standing outside the door. "You always appear when the red lamp reaches." "Put the pictures down," Allison said. He turned around, his face unreadable. "Did you know that true silver has no other side? It either darkens or shines. Here you are. Sometimes you shine, sometimes you turn black, Al. I'm trying to understand what you will become tomorrow. Take me out of the frame. This is the past. The past is my best material." He picked up a photograph with her shadow in the window. "Images breathe as long as someone remembers them. I breathe, that means you do too." There was a quiet rustling sound. Jessica was on the stairs. Allison rushed to the door before her daughter stepped onto the last step. "Mom, I wanted water," the girl asked, yawning. "I'll bring it now," Allison answered, covering her back with the door. She heard Ryan behind her slowly folding an envelope. "Grab it for me too, if possible," he lazily drawled through the crack, but his voice was already addressed to Jessica. Allison felt an ice ball form in her chest. He took the envelope with him. Jessica did not notice anything. Sleep enveloped her in a falling robe. The next morning, David found a nail embedded in a Subaru tire in the yard. While he and Ryan were changing the tire, not a single muscle moved on his son-in-law's face. He thanked his future father-in-law and joked about the universe testing new routes. As soon as David turned, Ryan glanced out the kitchen window. Allison, watching from behind the curtain, met that gaze. No ingratiation, no anger, just a cold warning, like a blade crafted by a jeweler. And at exactly that moment it dawned on David. Something was wrong here. He noticed how Allison pulled back, and for the first time a shadow of doubt flashed in his eyes. He stood up and wiped the dirt from his forehead with the silk of his palm. "Everything is fine. The wheel is crap. I'll order a set tomorrow." "Of course," Allison replied, trying to keep her face straight. "You're pale. Or is it just me?" David held his gaze, but at that moment Ryan was already tightening the nut, demonstrating concern. Every spark of suspicion was extinguished under his consummate politeness. All day Ryan whispered fleeting, almost innocent compliments to Allison, and then pointedly turned away when she tried to answer something. Before Jessica's eyes, he touched her shoulder to help with a heavy canvas, and a minute later he invariably disappeared, leaving a different kind of heaviness. In the evening, as soon as father and daughter went out to have tea in the living room, he blocked Allison's path at the stairs. "Have you noticed? He can already feel the current," Ryan whispered. "The line is thinner than it seems. I'm waiting for you to stop hiding in the shadows." "You're playing with people," she hissed. "I'm bringing the frame back into focus," he replied and walked away to the others, smiling as if he had just corrected the warp of the door. Allison stood, feeling the board vibrate under her feet. The crack, barely audible yesterday, was gaining volume today. The cold passed through the gap. She understood. Jealousy, revenge, love, whatever motivates him, Ryan shuffles them like a deck of negatives, choosing the most contrasting one for printing. And if she doesn't intervene, the first real burst of light will shatter the cover into splinters. In the living room, Jessica's laughter and David's calm baritone still kept the house looking normal, but the paint on the film was already showing too thickly. Allison took a step, then another. This time she was going to enter the frame herself before Ryan pressed the shutter. Monday morning started with oatmeal and a short break. Jessica was leafing through the latest issue of Rolling Stone. David was trying to control the capricious toaster. Allison was putting berries on plates. Ryan was leaning against a joint, lazily drinking orange juice. You know, oatmeal is a terrible force, he said, as if remembering a joke. Once upon a time, my friend and I ate it for a week straight at a motel by the ocean. Since then, I have associated the taste of freedom with oatmeal. Funny, right? Allison's knife struck the ceramic. Jessica looked up. Motel? Freedom? Is this from your old filming? An old project like Summer Without Rules, Ryan shrugged. Nothing serious, just fog, salt, and fun company. Some secret muse. The daughter grinned, but her gaze slid to her mother. Allison leaned over the plate so low that a strand of hair covered her cheek. You shouldn't idealize the past, she said quietly. Each story has its own price. Ryan smiled almost imperceptibly, as if he had caught a ball in mid-flight. The price is remembered only when the check arrives, he answered and went for coffee, leaving a slight smell of cedar in the air. That afternoon, Jessica dragged Ryan to the library to pick out materials for a photo book. Allison started to pick up the brush, but the focal point kept shifting. Either the line would waver or the paint would be too thick. The morning dialogue lived in my head, responding with a resounding pain. She closed the workshop and went out onto the veranda. There David was polishing an old Mustang. Will you help? He asked, holding out a bottle of polish. She nodded and began drawing circles on the wing, trying to keep her breathing even. It was quiet for a few minutes. The radio music on the hood clicked old hit chords. You know, David said without looking, our girl's boyfriend is really in love. Did you see how he looks at her? Eyes like yours when you first came to Carson Creek. Allison's lips twitched. Yes, she breathed, in love. But he put his hand on her wrist. It's like you're always waiting for a blow. She twitched barely noticeably. I guess I'm afraid that happy stories end too quickly. David wanted to answer, but the engine of Jessica's SUV interrupted the conversation. The car stopped and bags of book catalogs spilled out of the car. Ryan gallantly opened the door for the girl and helped her take off her backpack. Dad, at the art fair, they give a discount on frames. Jessica fussed. We could arrange my series for the exhibition. Great, David smiled. Ryan winked at his father-in-law. Light projects deserve a good frame. Sometimes the frame is more important than the canvas. The phrase cut into Allison like cold. Jessica, hugging the guy around the waist, suddenly felt an imperceptible tension in his body, as if a string had been stretched at the moment of the hug. She pulled back a step and looked closely at both parents. That evening, while Allison was preparing thyme risotto, Ryan appeared at the stove. He brought the wooden spoon to his face and inhaled the aroma. Thyme. Do you remember, Al, how you squeezed it in your palms to make it smell stronger? The waterfall then almost drowned out our voices. I don't, she stopped, glancing at Jessica. I don't remember us making risotto together. Not risotto, but a secret. Ryan smiled widely and raised his hands in surrender. Did you do something wrong? Sorry, young lady, sometimes my stories get mixed up. Jessica handed the spoon to her mother. Mom, have you really been to the waterfall in Astoria? Once or twice, Allison answered without looking up. The artist needs references. Interesting, the girl thought. Rye says it's difficult to get to the frame there without support. The terrain is difficult. The mother nodded briefly. You need to know where to put your foot. Ryan chuckled quietly, and Allison felt a chill run down her spine. That laugh had everything an echo of an old motel, a lighthouse without a light, their shared secret footprints in the fog. Later, while clearing the table, Jess noticed that Ryan had left a notebook behind when he went to the car to get a tripod. On the cover, there is a sticker with a small lighthouse. Curiosity got the better of her. She flipped through the page and saw almost finished layouts of the photo series, Doors That Shake. Among the sketches are portraits of her, a sketch of an old lighthouse, and a vague figure of a woman in a long skirt shot from the back. Under the pencil sketch is signed, June, heat, silence. Her mother's steps made her slam the notebook shut. Did you find something interesting? Allison asked. Jessica took a deep breath. Ryan. He draws a lot. About some doors, beacons. What is this? About? The mother took the book and slid her finger over the lid as if checking the temperature. You'll see it soon in the final project. All artists have their own symbols. Mom, the girl hesitated. He spoke so strangely today. About oatmeal, freedom, mystery, waterfall. Your hand twitches. Allison forced herself to smile. Just coincidences. Ryan loves to play with words. And you, curiosity and apprehension sparkled in her daughter's eyes at the same time. Are you sure you're not hiding anything? The mother felt a spasm constrict her throat. There was an abyss between the internal yes and no. I love you, she said quietly instead of answering. This is the only important thing. The night turned out to be sleepless. In the living room, Ryan was laying out prints on the floor. Jessica was asleep, David was dozing in a chair, and Allison was watching from behind the slightly open door. He moved the cards like a chess player, now smiling, now frowning. In one photo, there is a kitchen window with her shadow. On the other is Jessica's hand holding a sapphire ring like a torch. And next to it is a photograph of a dilapidated lighthouse in a purple dawn. Combined, these three images told a terrifyingly clear story. You're building a trap, she whispered. Ryan looked up, unsurprised. I build honesty, he answered just as quietly. You just have to choose. You open the door, or the trembling will do it itself. He collected the photographs and bowed lightly. Time is running out, Al. Jessica hears. David was almost awake, and the frame has already called the viewer. I'll decide for myself, her voice broke into a whisper. But for now, keep quiet. Agreement, he nodded, louder until the first crack. And the crack is close, do you hear? He simply flicked the switch on the table lamp. In the darkness, I could smell the developer and the rain that was beginning to drum on the roof. Allison returned to the bedroom, feeling her heart answering with a dull echo behind every stroke of the water. Jessica may already be hiding questions like sharp shells under her pillow. David is asleep, but in his sleep, he probably hears Ryan's strange words about rust and late inspectors. And she sits on the edge of the bed, knowing, the truth is like a film that has long been immersed in the developer. You can shake the tank more slowly, you can delay the moment, but the image will still appear. Keeping it in the dark means risking it fading incorrectly. To say it means to lose everything that held the house together. Lightning flashed outside the window again, illuminating the spruce branches and the wall of the workshop where the painted doors trembled. Allison touched her chest. Her heart was beating very quickly, and her mouth whispered silently, like a film saying goodbye to a secret. Not yet. Not yet. The gilded sunset blended with the garlands of lampshades with which Jessica had decorated the garden all day. The family party in honor of the engagement promised to be intimate. Close friends of the Harpers, the neighbor couple Collins, two classmates of Jess. On the long table, under the maple, saucers of canapé shone, and there was a vase of sunflowers, a gift from Ryan. David turned on some old vinyl Fleetwood Mac, Allison's favorite band, and checked the mood of the guests, as if he were inspecting a construction site. Is everyone comfortable? Is there any wind? Ryan worked the first half hour perfectly, poured champagne, made harmless jokes, played along with David on the topic of a wedding budget is just an estimate. But after the third mug of cider, he switched to whiskey and began to refill himself more often than everyone noticed. Only Allison saw. Each new dose is a step along a narrow log thrown over an abyss. Ryan raised his glass to the strains of Go Your Own Way, swaying slightly. For freedom, he said louder than the situation required. For going your own way, even if the path goes along the edge of an abyss. Let's talk about love after all, David tried to pick up. Love is part of freedom, Dave, Ryan grinned, and, as if to prove it, drained his glass in one gulp. Jessica giggled, touching his elbow. You've had enough, cowboy. More toast to come. He put down his glass and pulled her towards him. You are my best shot, greenie. No filters. Then he turned towards Allison. Although filters sometimes save old drawings, right? Ryan, Allison said quietly, You'd better switch to water. He winked. Water is an honest developer, Al. It washes away everything unnecessary. Allison felt David searching for her hand under the table, but her fingers were shaking, and she couldn't put confidence in his palm. An hour later, congratulations were already heard in the garden. Mrs. Collins handed Jessica an embroidered for the family bread napkin, and neighbor Mark patted Ryan on the shoulder. Take care of your potential father-in-law, Guy. He's gold for us. Treasures need to be polished. Ryan raised his glass. Allison, who knows better about this than us? Jessica's eyebrow twitched. Paradise, you keep making jokes about Mom. What kind of we? We are the creators of the Northwestern avant-garde, he chuckled. Once we wrote together, a masterpiece. Allison turned to the appetizer table, but Jess glared at her. Mom, what a masterpiece. Old sketch, dear. Forget. Well, Ryan interjected. The thing, by the way, was worth a lot. At least, to me. Allison froze. David came closer. Hey, buddy, looks like you've had too much. Let's change the subject. The topic is inevitable, Ryan muttered, as if to himself. Like rust, you can't paint it over forever. He reached for the bottle, but David gently grabbed his wrist. Let's breathe out. Seriously. Seriously? Ryan chuckled. What about the seriousness of other people's souls? Other people's secrets that tremble in the walls? He shook his head towards the house. Over there, under those boards, the draft is moaning, because it knew us before this sapphire. Ryan, shut up. Allison lost her voice, but the sound sounded sharper than a scream. The guests became silent. The music continued to play Dreams in mockery. Mom, Jessica stepped closer. Do you know what he's talking about? She knows everything, Ryan grinned, and she is silent. And silence. Oh, how expensive it is. Not here, Allison hissed. Let's go talk. But Ryan raised his hand as if presenting a circus act. The audience is already here. Let's give them clean exposure. I forbid it, she whispered, feeling her heart beating in her throat. Do you forbid it? He lurched forward. Did you also forbid the past? And, turning to Jessica, he blurted out, Your mother and I, we were together. For a long time, passionately, during those very freedom shoots. The words hit like a thrown stone. The record stuck. Stevie Nicks' voice became a twitchy squeak. The guests froze with their glasses halfway. What? Jessica's voice first broke into a whisper, then grew. WW, what do you mean, together? Stop it. Allison took a step towards Ryan, but he was already retreating, arms outstretched. It's too late to stop developing, Al. The image has popped up. You, Jessica, turned to her mother. This is true. Let me explain, Allison breathed, holding out her hand. Answer, the daughter shouted, hitting the table with her palm so that the wine glasses rattled. Yes. The mother's voice broke. It was a mistake. I stopped. For a long time. A mistake. Jessica stepped back as if she had received a slap in the face, while David stood like a statue. The glass of cider slipped from his fingers and broke in the grass. The splashes stuck to his trousers. Are you, he said hoarsely, with my future son-in-law, when 2 years ago, Ryan muttered. So, to clarify the chronology. 2. David's eyes widened. That is, while Jess was home on vacation, while were we building the terrace? Dave, Allison began, but he raised his hand. Not now. He swayed as if the air had become liquid. Jess, let's get out of here. Where? My daughter burst out. Is the house a stranger now? She turned to Ryan, tears glistening on her face. You lied to me. In every frame, in every word. I loved you, he said quietly, and I love it. But I didn't want a roof made of lies. You chose the moment well, the girl muttered. What a holiday, the holiday of truth. Ryan spread his hands. What's the point of wearing rings if there are cracks in the foundation? Cracks? Jessica tore off the ring and threw it on the table. Keep your truth. The ring hit the plate of olives and rolled to the edge. Jess, Allison screamed, but her daughter was already retreating, tearing the napkin from the chair. "Don't touch me," she hissed. You destroyed everything." "I ruined this," Ryan intervened, taking a step towards her. "Don't blame your mother. Go away." She pushed him away with her palm and turned to her father. "Dad, let's go to Aunt Renee. Now." David looked up at Allison. "Then we'll talk, if it's about anything." "Dave, please." Her voice broke into a sob. He walked past as if through a ghost. Jessica took the car keys without looking back. They walked through the petrified guests to the car. "Let me explain," Allison shouted, but the Mustang's doors slammed. The engine roared, the wheels tore off the gravel, taking half of her life away from the house. Neighbor Collins pressed her hand to her chest. "Ellie, baby." "Sorry," Allison said without looking. "The evening is over." The guests hurriedly left the courtyard, casting confused glances. Ryan stood in the middle of the grass, swaying. "Here you go." "All the masks are off," he said, as if summing it up. Allison approached, her eyes burning. "Did you want honesty? Received. Now go away. Forever." "I wanted to save us," he muttered, "so that everything would be clean." "You ruined everything." She hit his chest with her fist, then another. All. He did not resist, only closed his eyes when her palms fell away. In the distance, behind the trees, the sound of the engine faded. "Sorry," Ryan whispered. "I thought." "Don't think." She turned to the empty table, where the sapphire glittered forlornly like tiny broken glass. "My daughter doesn't need the truth, but the feeling that the world is at least somewhere safe." Tears flowed, and she reeled. Ryan extended his hand, but Allison pulled back. "If you love, disappear. At least let me decide this myself." He nodded slowly. He took the old leather bracelet off his wrist and placed it next to the ring, as if he were handing over the props of a completed play. "Goodbye, woman of June," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked towards the gate, limping. The lantern lamps crackled over the empty table. Allison squeezed the standing glass, but the glass slipped out and broke, mixing champagne, tears, and raindrops of the first thunderstorm drops that had been awaited for so long in the grass. The sky finally opened up. The sidewalk outside the house was flooded by the first thunderstorm, but Ryan was in no hurry to cross the gate. He stood under the sound of drops, as if he was waiting for the last take. Allison caught up with him at the creaking gate, wet, excited, but no longer crying. "I told you to go away," she said heavily. "I'll leave now," Ryan responded without turning around. "But perhaps honesty is worth pursuing to the end." "Even more honest? You destroyed our family, Ryan. What's not enough for you?" He threw up the collar of his jacket like a shield. "Destroyed is a strong word. The house was already cracking. I just sped up the process." "For what? For some kind of perverted art?" He grinned. "Do you really believe that I suddenly wanted family comfort? I was looking for you. For a long time. Ever since you walked out of your room at the lighthouse and said, 'It's over.' Do you remember? I loved my family and wanted to save her." Allison's voice broke. "And I wanted to save myself. Do you know what it's like to be thrown out after the brightest summer? It's like a burnt film. The negative remains. I lived in this negativity for years until I saw your old photos of Jessica in the City Museum. I recognized the style, the touch, and understood where to look for the artist Allison Harper. And I came up with a plot." She was dumbfounded. "Did you get to my daughter on purpose, because of revenge?" "Revenge is only part of it. The second is an excellent social elevator. The daughter of a decent family, exhibitions, grants the golden ticket. The sapphire on her hand was worth less than the connections that would have opened." Allison hit him on the chest with her palm. "Bastard, she believed you." "I did," he confirmed dryly, "and I would have continued to believe if you weren't stubborn. But instead of supporting the new version of our duet, you closed yourself off. So we had to cut the scenery quickly. Did you want me to bless your marriage?" The role of the goddaughter of our future is symbolically beautiful. Imagine the headlines: "Artist and documentary filmmaker unite generations." It would be beneficial for everyone. Profitable, Allison laughed painfully. And you ruined Jessica's life for profit? For the first time, he looked straight into her eyes. You destroyed it then, at the lighthouse, when you chose a decent house instead of me. I just arranged the frames so that you can finally see the result of your editing. Lightning illuminated their faces. Ryan pale, stubbornly calm. Allison was shaking with cold and anger. Will you get what you wanted? She whispered. Money? Status? Do you think that after such a scandal anyone will support you? They will support the scandal. Scandals feed film festivals. I will edit the truth so that the audience will cry. A woman torn by duty and passion. A man seeking redemption. The talented daughter is the perfect neo-noir. But without my permission, you will not receive a single shot of me. Permission? Ryan chuckled. I took off enough of mine. And the letters. You keep them, right? The archive will become a voiceover. Allison closed her eyes, gathering the last of her strength. Leave before I call the police and tell reporters how you hunted a 20-year-old girl pretending to be her knight. He bowed his head. You have no evidence. There is correspondence, witnesses from second chapter, a recording from a neighbor's camera where you guarded the house at night. I'm an artist, Ryan, but living with a documentarian taught me how to gather facts. Something similar to doubt flashed in his gaze, but his face again became stony. So our story will turn into a trial, also a script. But keep in mind, I'm always looking for the best angle. I will find the light where you seem real, she said quietly. And this time, I will set up the exposure. Ryan nodded, as if accepting the challenge, stepped through the gate, and disappeared into the rain. His leather bracelet remained on the path, wet as a snake. Allison picked it up and slowly squeezed it with her fist, feeling the cold water running down her palm. Jessica spent 2 nights at Aunt Renee's without a suitcase, without a toothbrush, but with a heavy silence that no questions from her relatives could break through. At dawn on the 3rd day, she called Ryan herself. Meet me at second chapter. 15 minutes. If you come, it's good. If you don't, that's fine too. The voice was hoarse and alien. Ryan responded briefly, I will. The bell above the bookstore door jingled as Jessica entered. Stanley, accustomed to her visits, opened his mouth to greet him, but fell silent when he saw the expression on her face. She walked to the far table, took out a box with a ring, and placed it on a tattered volume of The Poetics of the Frame. A dark jacket flashed through the window. Ryan arrived, thoroughly wet from the morning drizzle. Zelionka. He sat down opposite and reached for her hand. The movement was cut short by the sound of her palm, hitting the table sharply, loudly. Don't you dare. I'm not a green girl, and not a frame. I'm human, she said evenly. Here's your ring. He opened the box. The sapphire flared up with icy fire. It wasn't a trick, Ryan said quietly. I proposed because I loved you. I love it. You loved the idea. He loved revenge. And maybe he loved the status. But not me. Jessica wiped her tears with the back of her hand. You lied about everything. Both about them and about us. I didn't lie about my feelings, he whispered, leaning closer. We could. She pushed back her chair and stood up. We couldn't do anything. I'm leaving your movie. End of scene. Jess, listen. It's too late to listen. If you try to enter my life, my parents' house again, I will tell the police in detail how you looked for material for your story. I remember, am a photojournalist. I know how to record facts. Understood? He squeezed the ring, and for a second anger flashed in his eyes, but disappeared, gave way to hopeless fatigue. Got it, he said hoarsely. She came out first. Stanley watched her go. Ryan remained at the table with his head down. By lunchtime, Jessica returned home. The yard was empty, the garlands were still hanging from the maple tree, but most of the light bulbs had been knocked out by the wind. Silence opened the door. There was a plate of cookies on the kitchen table, obviously my mother's attempt. She ignored me and headed towards the stairs. David came out of the living room. Sonny, he began carefully. I'm fine, Dad. She passed without almost touching the floor. I need to pack my things. I'll go to Renee's before the semester starts. Okay, he nodded, trying to smile. If necessary, I will help with the boxes. Thank you. Jessica was already getting up when she heard from below. Jess, Mom, she. Please, not now, she snapped. I'm not ready. The door to her room closed. An hour later, Allison heard her daughter's footsteps in the hallway. She was sitting in the workshop, but rushed forward, wiping her palms on her shabby apron. Jess, you could say. You can't, the daughter snapped, without raising her eyes. I understand that I hurt you, but you must know the circumstances. I don't owe anything, the voice cut like glass. You were my guide, but it turned out. The words choked. I'd like to check out. You have the right to be angry, Allison blocked the way. Just, let me hug you before we go. Don't touch me, the voice broke into a scream. You destroyed my trust. Now don't pretend to care. She walked around her mother and went downstairs, where David was putting a dirty, fragile sticker on the box. The car is ready, he said, trying not to look at his wife. Seeing his daughter's eyes, he added, I'll take you. Allison came closer. I can also. Jessica raised her palm as if she was putting up an invisible wall. Stay here. Disassemble your doors on canvases. With these words, she left. David paused for a split second. The spouse's gazes met. There's a silent plea in Allison's eyes. In his, there was a tired misunderstanding under which love flickered, but covered with resentment. He took the keys and closed the door behind him. The Mustang's engine died down as the car drove out of the yard. Allison was left in a void, filled only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the crackle of broken light bulbs in the wind. There was a forgotten envelope on the table. The cookies remained untouched. She put it away, returned to the studio, and removed the canvas with 4 doors from the easel. I set up a blank canvas. I took the thinnest pencil. My palms were shaking, but a line appeared, a tiny outline of the imprint of a key. Thunder rumbled outside as the clouds gathered again. Allison realized that there was a long job ahead to convince her daughter, to return her husband, to write Ryan's shadow out of herself. But today she will be left alone to draw the first honest stroke without filters and without lies, even if it becomes the darkest in her palette. It rained in Carson Creek for the second week in a row, as if the sky pipe leak was beyond repair. The Harper house felt foreign for the first time in 20 years. David slept on the pull-out couch in the living room, Allison in the upstairs bedroom. The steps between the floors echoed dryly, like a canyon in the desert. In the evenings, they hardly crossed paths. She returned to the easel. He stayed late at work, checking every weld as if the metal would save the marriage. One Saturday morning, Allison went down for coffee and saw a stack of documents on the kitchen table: property inventory forms, legal advice. My heart thumped loudly. Are you serious? She asked as David walked in, wiping his hands with a towel. It couldn't be more serious, he answered, without looking him in the eye. I was looking into the possibilities. Divorce, because of my mistake 2 years ago, and his production. Al, this is not just about a mistake. He sat down and pressed his palms to his temples. I haven't felt anything next to you for 2 years. It was as if I lived side by side with a painting on which another person was painted, and I didn't even suspect that the canvas was double. She sat down on a chair. I was hiding from myself, she admitted in a whisper, and from you. I was probably afraid that you would see how imperfect I am. Imperfect. We are all not without cracks, but you patched them up with silence. He squeezed the glass so hard that the plastic rim cracked. Understand, betrayal is not only the body. This is a year of lies every morning at this table. Allison ran her finger along the dent in the wood made by the cup. Please, give me a chance to do something I haven't done before, she said. Don't hide, but work on us. David was silent for a long time. Through the roar of the rain, the knocking of the clock seemed like an oath. He put the papers in the drawer. If you work, then seriously, he said. Marital therapist, tough agreements. I'm not ready to sleep under the same roof until I regain your trust or you return yours to me. I agree, Her voice became hoarse. If only there was a chance. Tuesday. The office of family psychologist Dr. Lori has beige walls and chairs that look like a soft vice. Formulate your goal, the doctor asked, adjusting her glasses to the bridge of her nose. To see if we can rebuild the we, David said, crossing his arms. Bring back honesty, Allison added, and learn not to be afraid of the truth. The therapist nodded and began to methodically untangle their knots. The sessions were hard. They remembered the first kiss under a school visor, the first mortgage bills, sleepless nights with infant Jessica, and that summer when Allison went to the ocean for inspiration and brought back a secret instead of paintings. Every time she wanted to crawl into her shell, David asked a direct question. Every time he became withdrawn, the doctor asked him to name a feeling, not an argument. As the weeks passed, the divorce papers began to gather dust, but the living room furniture never returned to the bedroom. At the fifth meeting, the doctor gave homework, a joint project without words. Do what united you before a crack appeared. Let your hands work, your voice be silent. David suggested fixing the old veranda, replacing the rotten boards, installing fresh mesh against the muskets. Allison brought brushes and painted the top rail, a delicate blue design that faded into gold spirals. David, seeing her leaning against the tree, suddenly remembered the day when he hung the swing for her, and for the first time in months he touched her shoulder without tension. Beautiful, he said quietly. Thank you, and for the first time she smiled sincerely. Meanwhile, Jessica was staying with Renee. She responded to her mother's messages with a cold, I saw, and less often contacted her father, I don't want him to suffer. Instead of photo books, she wrote angry essays where the film turned into a metaphor for mistrust. One day, Renee, knocking carefully, entered the room. Sweetie, she said, don't tie the offense into knots. The knots tear the fabric. The fabric has already been torn, Jessica answered. My mother is a stranger. But the next night she dreamed of a house. Her mother was painting a new door in the workshop. Warm light was pouring from inside. The girl woke up in tears and boarded the bus at dawn. Allison and David were just laying the last sheet of roofing iron on the awning when the minibus pulled up. Jess walked out with a single backpack. Aunt Renee said that my eyes were swollen from the salt. The daughter awkwardly tried to joke. I decided to check the forecast at home. The father came down the stairs, dusting off his hands. We missed you, he said. I know, she lowered her gaze. Dad, I'm sorry I passed out. There is a reason. David hugged her carefully. Allison stood slightly to the side. Jessica walked up and stopped a step. I'm not ready to hug you yet, she warned, but I'm ready to listen if these are not excuses, but an explanation. They chose the veranda. The summer rain had reached a light drizzle, and the drops were knocking on the new iron. Allison told her daughter everything, the feeling of losing herself, the artificial respiration that the novel provided, the horror when she realized that she was tightening the levers. I thought, if I tell the truth, I'll lose my family. And she made a mistake twice, both by speaking late and by remaining silent for a long time. I was wrong 3 times, the daughter objected quietly. You gave him a place in our lives. But, she exhaled, probably mistakes are measured not by numbers, but by how much effort we spend to correct them. Are you ready to give time? Allison asked. Time, yes. Forgiveness, I don't know. But I saw that you were renovating the house together. If you can do it, maybe I can too. She stood up. I'll come by tomorrow to collect the rest of my things. A week later, a course in Portland, and then a move. Columbia University gave me a grant. New York is a blank slate. Allison's chest crunched, but she nodded. This will be your door reel, not shaking. We will help. David whispered. I'm proud of you, little one. The last days before leaving, they worked in tandem. David collected a list of college apartments. Allison helped sign boxes. Jessica filmed the family craft without Ryan. There was no sapphire on the film. The ring remained with Stanley. Jess gave it to the shop owner for a charity auction. On the eve of the flight, Allison put a thin album in her daughter's travel bag. blank pages, the title, The Light of Future Personnel. On the first sheet, there is a small watercolor lighthouse and the signature. Wherever you are, the light will find its way home. Jessica didn't say anything, but clutched the album to her chest. Portland Airport. The scoreboard exhaled, Gate 14, New York. David held the ticket so tightly that he bent the edge. Allison tried not to cry. David, don't tremble. Jessica, don't look back. Right call. And eat, said the father. Don't forget to eat. Dad, this is New York. It's impossible to go hungry there. The daughter smiled. Allison swallowed. You said that you were not ready to hug. Jessica stepped forward and still hugged her mother. Quiet, but strong. This is not forgiveness, she whispered. This is for now. For now is enough, Allison replied, kissing the top of her head. One last look. Jessica raised her hand in the familiar, ready-to-shoot gesture and clicked an imaginary camera shutter. Frame, she shouted and disappeared into the stream of passengers. That evening, the Harper house was quiet again. A faint light was coming out of the workshop. Allison was finishing a new detail on the canvas. A path appeared next to the four doors, a road leading to the bright city on the horizon. David, without saying a word, brought her a mug of tea and kept his hand on her shoulder. She turned, and for the first time in a long time their eyes met without fear. He saw in them not an apology, not despair, but a desire to be close. Let's go to bed, he said. Tomorrow it will rain again, but now the roof won't leak. Allison put the brush in the jar and turned off the lamp. The paint still smelled of oil, but inside there was a pure, almost ringing feeling. The family canvas had been saved, and the highlights on it would become softer when time had finally dried. It was raining outside, but in the house where honesty had polished the frames, hidden doors no longer creaked, only the smooth, warm sound of two hearts working again in unison. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.